weird. It's like a weird. I'm trying to show it.
Will's stealing the show to start the podcast.
Trying to show this weird painting.
This is Printed and Pressed. I'm Chris.
And I'm Will.
And I'm Andrew.
And today we're covering a book that was written, it was written in the 90s. It was when published. Anyway.
It's 2,000 years in the making.
It's 2,000. And not quite. I didn't back that far. That'd be the Bible. But probably older than that, actually, at this point. Anyways, this book is called A World Lit Only by Fire by William Manchester. It's a very English-sounding name, but name. He was American, right?
Yeah, the way he wrote, I would assume he is American.
Yeah, I assume he has to be American. Anyways, with the foreword by Tom Hanks, which I
do not read that version.
No, just give me a minute. If you want to cringe hardcore when you read the book, definitely read this version. Anyways, but why did we pick this book, Will? What was your reasoning?
I thought, so what's funny is that I was actually assigned this as a class assignment once, and I thought it was a really interesting read and like a start for the age. So if you wanted to get interested in this period of time, which at the time I didn't know much about, this was a good introduction. It's by no means meant to be the end all be all. It touches on a lot of the major happenings and major characters throughout the story of the Middle Ages. And I thought it was interesting. And also Chris and Andrew really like the Borgia show. So I was like, yeah, they're going to love this one.
Well, it's funny. I've actually, I would say if you have zero medieval knowledge whatsoever, period, you have none. This book might be entertaining for you, or you might learn some things. But if you have a lot of background on what's going on in this time period, this probably isn't a book you're going to read. I'm going to start it off right there. But let's get into what the book is and what it isn't. We'll start off with a kind of walkthrough of what is in the book and what you'll get out of it. And before we do that, the foreword by Tom Hanks is atrocious. It's an abomination for literature. It's absolutely terrible, and it shows the biases that Tom Hanks has towards different groups of people over history. And I don't like it. I don't appreciate anything that Tom Hanks put in this. It geared me up the wrong way to read this book.
Well, yeah, you're easily triggered, Chris. We all know this. But
that's not true. That's not true. I'm not easily triggered, but Tom Hanks was terrible.
No, Tom Hanks can trigger a lot of people. Let's be honest here. The last good thing he did was contribute to Band of Brothers and
A Man Called Otto was a good movie. Actually, they did a good job.
It was really sad.
But nothing is nearly as good as Band of Brothers. I'm talking about his last great.
I mean, Band of Brothers was a great movie.
But also Tom Hanks is a great actor. It just his forward apparently, which I didn't read because I didn't have that copy, is apparently terrible.
It literally makes me not want to read the book. Period.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what you wrote. But in our copies, we have an author note, and the author's note really is important to read. So when you get in, just whenever you guys are reading this, maybe you do have it.
I do have it,
Chris.
I do have the author's note.
Okay, so it's
still got salty.
Oh no, but I did.
Anyway, so the author's note, I think it's pretty much summed up in this. He says that he's proud of finishing this book, but it says it is, after all, a slight work with no scholarly pretensions. All the sources are secondary and few are new. I have not mastered recent scholarship on the early 16th century. And I think then he goes into saying like how he had experts in the field review each section and how some of them disagreed with the way that he was telling the story. Specifically, if you go into and look at some of the controversy surrounding this book, his interpretation of how the medieval mind, which is actually, it's the portrait of an age, so the medieval mind, that he may have misinterpreted that a little bit and made it bleaker than what it really was. So apparently at the time that he wrote the book, it was a fairly popular idea still. But as Chris, I think you pointed it out already.
I didn't point it out yet, no.
Okay, so nowadays, we no longer think it was as bleak as he makes it out in this book. And it was slightly more hopeful. Also, the idea of I think he does a good job in the book, but we used to call it the Dark Ages. It's no longer the Dark Ages because it's medieval period, and they still have less.
The Dark Ages because of the fall from Rome, which they were always of for the most part, anyway. So.
Yeah, it's just a misinterpretation because there's some places that prospered more because of the fall of Rome. There's things that still happened. There's still quite a bit of things still going on. It wasn't necessarily as bleak again as he's making out in the book. So I just wanted to make that note.
It probably helps when you're looking at an era like this to read things contemporary with the era in which you're writing about. So, like, for example, I'm reading a book called Piers Plowman, which was written in the 1300s, and it gives a much brighter picture of that time period than what he gives in this book, period.
Well,
Which is very interesting.
I think there's a lot when shit hit the fan in the medieval era, though, it really hit the fan.
Yeah.
And I think that's the focus of this more so.
It definitely is.
Because on average, when things were okay, it's not a bleak environment. It's still prosperous enough, right?
It also depends on your interpretation. So, like, from him, he's thinking of this as an American in the 90s, looking back. It's like, wow, that time sucked.
Relative, yeah.
Yeah, relatively, it did. So,
yeah. I mean, relative to the Romans, a lot of it sucked too.
Yes.
Like, that's why it's called the Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put the focus on how people acted when shit hit the fan, when there was conflict or plague, you're going to see a lot of dark stuff happen in this era. It is a very bleak era. That the second anything like that happens. So I don't necessarily fault him for depicting it that way, because your daily life was on the precipice of going dark very fast and being hopeless. So that's my take on it. I don't want to.
Well, the life expectancy was like 30.
Yeah, so, I mean, just that alone, right? That is bleak.
Oh, it's super bleak. I would be dead. So yeah, it's very bleak.
I mean, for the record, the only pass he gets from me is the fact that this was written in the 90s, like you said, before the age of the internet, before we had a lot of information that we have access to now. And it's readily at our fingertips. You don't have to go hunting or searching for it. So what information he had available was based on what publications, books, etc. were available to him in the area he lived in or where he was willing to travel to.
Well,
and so based on that, I give him a pass on some of his historical inaccuracies, but he doesn't get a pass for his bias.
Okay.
There is some
he
bias.
Doesn't have, I mean, okay, Chris, I know you're going to, you have a lot where you're complaining about historical inaccuracies. He doesn't have significant ones that I really notice that stand out. There's things that he takes a stand on because he's not in this to debate them. He's picking a narrative that he believes to be true because he's trying to create a timeline that is just a timeline story of what the mind is. Even if he's only showing one side of certain topics per se.
Yeah.
Like, okay, for example, Borgia. There is debate about the incest accusations of the Borgia family.
Yeah, but from the mind of the laity, that's what he's framing a lot of those things on. So the people he constantly brings up, the people that are surrounding those areas, that's what they thought. So he does frame a lot of those things.
That was the propaganda of the era for the Italian church member, the cardinals and everything. They were spreading that everywhere. That was the public image of them because they were doing everything they could to not have another non-Italian pope. Like if you
he does say that too, like a couple times when he quotes some of these people who are talking on this, is like he does frame it to let you know that this is propaganda, but he is taking it from.
But he does also take it. He does also take a lot of that information from a diary of someone that was technically within the Borgia circle. So it's not 100% just bias that is like against him. It's a legitimate source that would have been rewarded by Borgia. He didn't, influence his diary in any way. He just didn't think it was important. So there is honesty there. I know there's controversy, but he's just trying to paint the era from the most popular narrative, I guess, that he can find at the time. Yep. And I don't think that we should fault him because he's just trying to, as I said, paint that picture of what people were thinking, because he's trying to show the whole purpose of this book is Magellan stuff. That's his focus. It's like, this is the world that Magellan was a product of.
Okay, but here's the thing. All right, people, even if they did not have wristwatches or giant clock towers or whatever you have in these day and age, people could still tell time to the extent that they were able to get to where they needed to be. So, for example, if you had church, just let me just stop.
Did not care.
Okay, but you know what? There were still church bells. There were still people that did things at specific times of day. People weren't stupid. And he kind of paints the picture like people were stupid.
Did you read the Wikipedia? Because that's the only argument that they make. Just out of curiosity.
Dude,
no,
okay.
I totally agree with you, by the way, Chris. So that was something that I also, like, again, now that we have more information on this. Yeah.
I do have complaints. Like, okay, the thing is,
there's zero
precise
footnotes
time.
too. He literally does not give you any window into the research he did for this. Zero.
I mean, he has an entire.
He has a whole thing about sources. What are you talking about?
I said footnotes. So as he's giving you the facts, he gives you the books.
Well, it's written like a story. I mean, I feel like if you're upset with that, then I can understand you unhappy with the structure of it. But he does give you the sources, and anytime he quotes someone, he tells you who it is.
Yeah. So this book essentially has 3 parts, though, right? We got the medieval mind as part 1.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing that people complain about online is part 1.
I gotta say something though. You are fairly critical of this take about the average serf not giving a shit about time, because that's true. Like, the church cared about time. Do you think that besides the bell ringing because the church is ringing the bell to tell people to do something, do you think the serfs really paid attention to time? Legit question there, Chris.
I would say they paid attention to daylight.
Okay, yeah,
because you can't work night during that time, not as well.
Even then, that's just saying, oh, it's noon.
Yeah,
that's not precise.
They cared about their meals, that's for sure.
If they had food.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But like the thing I'm saying is, you're a big fan of the Fourth Turning. The Fourth Turning makes the same exact claims about the medieval era.
Not quite.
It does about a lot of it. That's all I'm saying. It makes very similar claims about things that weren't like Roman, okay? When you didn't have high civilization. And my way of classifying the medieval era is you have basically 2 worlds intermingled. You have the peasantry who just does what they're freaking told. And then you have the educated class, which was basically the church and nobles, right?
Yeah, I would
they knew time and everything, but a lot did not.
I would argue almost that their lives were more regulated by time than you're giving credit, because they were regulated by, I have church at this time, I have work during this time period when whoever my master, I guess for lack of a better term, says, I get paid this much money for this amount of time every day. I have meals at these times specifically because that's when they let us have meals. I would almost argue that they were ruled by time.
I mean,
whether they knew they were or not.
Well, you're just making the argument for like a diurnal creature right now. So
yes. I mean, animals do the same freaking thing, correct?
But they also did not have.
No, but it's not like they're scheduling
things.
I'm saying it's not like they're scheduling a strict schedule. It's just when they get fed, they get fed. They're no different than the horse that you put out to, plow the field.
Yeah. No, that's not. I take some serious complaint against your classification.
Well, you have peasants. You have an internal clock, so that's what you're kind of arguing right now. It's like, yes, they had a concept of time, but it would not nearly be as precise as we have now. You could ask anyone.
They didn't have a wristwatch.
But it's not remotely the same as what we have as far as time schedules and precision. That's the thing, Chris.
Yeah, but if you didn't get up before dawn to get out in the fields, you might not get paid.
Well, you didn't really get paid as a serf anyway.
You got fed. Whatever you want to call.
That's what I'm
saying. Want to call payment. That's
I'm just saying. Horses know to wake up at the crack of dawn and go for the food if you feed them at the specific time. That doesn't mean you have timekeeping.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to disagree on that one, and we can move on to the next part.
Okay.
But I think the framing of the medieval mind.
Yeah, he does make it bleaker, and like I said, that people push back on it, and they push back on it now.
He's also a little bit annoying early on when he talks about what he views as Christian versus non-Christian traits, because he seems to want to give like all the great things to the Romans and the Greeks,
which is frustrating. Yes,
which is very frustrating. I will concur with that. And because, for example, he tried to say that wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance were not
Christian. Oh yeah, they're anti-Christian. They were the pagan themes that were moral.
Yeah, which is a stupid argument to make, because
it's the dumbest.
Nothing he brings up in the rest of the book supports that, and nothing in history supports that either.
There's literally nothing except, there's something that 100% disproves it, and that's every single freaking thing said in the Bible.
Yeah. But what's funny is he must have read that Tom Hanks foreword before he wrote that section.
Yeah, because it's just
yeah. Well, he also makes this
justice.
This low blow attack where he says that it's in the very first page that the Bible is super inconsistent, and it's just that was completely unnecessary. You're not a biblical scholar, so don't pretend to be. You don't make those claims at all for the rest of the story.
I'm willing to give him a pass because I think since then there's been a lot more proven about the consistencies.
Yeah, but even it's just I agree that, again, like Chris was saying, it's product of the time, but it was an unnecessary extra sentence that does not add to the story.
It's clearly a biasy.
Oh, yes.
He,
the bulk of conflicting footnotes in Bibles came out. This is just because I've done way too much biblical scholarly research on what causes revisions and stuff, because I read into so many of these. But essentially, a lot of the footnotes that have conflicting views of historical biblical timelines occurred during this time frame. So if you were trying to prove or disprove something, this is the time period when that was all going on. And so a lot of times Bibles, especially before the 90s, whatever Bibles he had access to were either the OG King James, your Dewey Reams Catholic one, which he probably didn't read, or you had one or two revised copies that were popular at this time that were revisions of the King James, and those revisions had some very conflicting footnotes.
But let's be honest though, if you look at the Dewey Rhymes or King James, they're both very good translations.
Yeah, and also that's not what he's talking about. So the inconsistency he's talking about is Jesus is contradicting himself. That is what he's trying to say, not our interpretation.
Well, no, that's when those type of footnotes were coming out. If you look at some of the revisions that were coming out at the time he wrote this, Chris, they were pretty inconsistent.
But Chris, let's be honest. If you're actively reviewing this, the King James version is pretty well understood to exist.
Well, that's the one that, to be fair, based on the time period that he's covering, the King James would have been an important Bible to reference because it was either in the process of being made, or it was made between the time frame of the 80s and 1611.
I'm going to break it to you. He did not reference the Bible for this. I don't.
No, there's no way he did.
He didn't
because it's not. Although obviously Christendom,
I'll be honest.
He clearly didn't. But Christendom was obviously the focus of this book simply because of the time frame and the region that he's looking at. But he's trying to take it from a not Christian scholarly perspective, and I think in most cases it's fine. But then there's this case where it's why did you say that? You don't know what you're talking about. Just focus on the main characters like you do for the rest of the story. So,
well, I just felt like he spent a long time on specific characters that had nothing to do with Magellan, and then clearly the whole book is written to give you the backdrop of Magellan, who had almost nothing to do with most of what's going on here, other than the fact that he was.
How do you get to Magellan? Is really what it was. It's hard. It's a hard link because
he's trying to set up the mind for the Renaissance, so to speak, the Renaissance of thought, where all these great thinkers, explorers,
also it goes from artists, again Rome to Christendom has taken over, and at that point, there's also this rigidity. So saying that the world's flat and not being able to change that. When you get to Magellan, he's proving that it's not. So there is sort of a link. It's loose because it would have been nice if he had reminded you that was the point the entire time. You were trying to get to that.
I felt like a lot of this book was okay, what is the point of this section?
Yeah, well, taking a step back, I can kind of see how it got to Magellan, but it's not clear. I actually kind of forgot that I was supposed to get to Magellan. And I read this book.
yeah. That might be a complaint. That can be a complaint.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's important though to just kind of look at it, because what he's really trying to show is that this is an era of persecution. It kind of is.
And people sucking. Just everyone sucks.
Yeah, everyone sucks. There's
also this great. Sorry, go on. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just saying there's a ton of persecution in all forms. You have the religious conflict. You have people just finding ways to take stuff from each other if they can. And you have it where the church persecutes, the rebellions persecute. You have it on all levels between the actual religious reasons or just political reasons.
Yeah. A lot of it was political. And then another thing is that though he gives you like all of the terrible things that were happening, he also shows you that there's so much amazing things that are also occurring at the same time. Like all of these cathedrals that are being built, these great works of art, these institutions that we still have today, these great thinking institutions, are all being
bankers,
built.
The business people of the era.
So it's a really weird time of conflict, because you have like this, I don't know what the word is, but like just terribleness, but then also like
you have a renaissance in this dark period.
In this section, I will give him the credit of showing how you get from knights to merchants and that whole process, because that was interesting. And I didn't see really a whole lot of issues with how he did that. I just feel like these are the three sections of this book are like distinct snapshots of different things going on that, unless you actually tie it together with your writing, there's nothing here for me that tells me why these things are linked.
Like I said, I forgot I was getting to Magellan, and I've read it more than once. So
Now, my biggest complaint with this book, especially in the first section, is the span of time in which he's covering in that first section is just, it's far too big. It's far too big. You can't cover it in the amount of pages he's covering it. And he's just hitting highlights, and he acts like everything he puts down is essentially like, this is the way it happened. He doesn't give you the fact that he's being a little subjective in places, and without getting into specific details. I did find
unless you read the author's note, which he tells you that he does do that.
Yeah,
so.
I understand that. I'm just saying, like, you lose that author's note the further you get into this book, because your brain is not remembering what he said in the
beginning. I don't know. I didn't lose it. I read it with that context in mind, because I didn't read that immediately after being pissed off by Tom Hanks.
Anyways, the thing that I found most interesting in this opening section, I think it was the opening section, is he's talking about like some great literature, and he brings up obviously Chaucer, and like I think he brings up the author of Beowulf. I could be wrong about that. But the thing that was funny was he brings up William Langland, who wrote Piers Plowman, the book that I'm reading right now. And although he mentions like the works of everybody else, he like decides, nah, we don't need to talk about Piers Plowman. Just like, forget that, even though it's like the most important work of the time right before Chaucer, which is even funnier. But anyways, it's just a minor complaint.
I think that first part where he really talks about the different religious conflict kind of stuff a little bit, like at an overview. Like he talks about how Arianism as a sect was very vindictive, and that brought in like its influence kind of brought in the violence aspect to Christianity a little bit. The forced conversions.
The Visigoths.
That's actually really important. So I was thinking about this going through the Luther section. It's actually really important to understand the politics in Germany. And like how that all happened, going back to this point. So the Gothic Christians that end up becoming absorbed into the Catholics. So it is interesting to see that mentality and some of the things that started off as Vikings and barbaric Germans still carry through up until Luther, and that actually informs a lot of the theology in that area at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of sects in the Christian faith that were just completely wiped out in the just genocided basically in the Roman era still. You have it where obviously the church became the wealthiest landowner. I think everyone knows that.
Which is why during the Protestant movement, you have a lot of these monarchs who are taking the church's land specifically to take that money.
I can't fault them, because when you read through the politics,
I absolutely can.
No, because in Germany, over half the wealth was basically going to Italy and the church, and it's like that's well beyond the 10% tithing, Chris.
But also they're being lied to what they're paying for.
Do you know how they get to that point, though? Do you know how they end up sending that much money to the Roman emperor? Do you know how that happens? Dude,
they're sending much.
No, you didn't answer my question. You're not answering my question.
Yes, they were requested to give money to them for the Crusades. They're talking about how much
which were canceled.
Yeah, which were canceled and the money never returned. Like the nobles were being told to give money for
at
the
this
crusade.
time, though, the Roman Empire that had formed started in Germany. And so they started by giving lots of money to the German emperors. And I think that just continued on through this era, especially with the Crusades. Because when the Roman Empire rebooted the Western side, it started with the German emperors.
Are you talking
after
about the Roman Empire? Because that's completely different from the Roman Empire.
That's not
the same thing.
Different.
I know that.
But so he makes a valid point though about the holidays.
Still associated with the Pope. The Pope was the one who elevated Henry II up to be the Holy Roman Emperor in like the 1100s.
I mean, it all starts with Charlemagne.
Yeah, Charlemagne was before that. I agree.
No, but the thing is, like, he also makes a very valid point though about the church co-opting pagan holidays.
No, yes, he doesn't. There's
the specific days.
Chosen. I could do a whole podcast on just that alone, and I'm not going to do that.
The dates chosen, Chris. The dates chosen, yes. And then, I mean, technically, you could say that a lot of Catholic tradition is very ritualistic, and that's kind of also like even the concept of candles, the way candles are used. I'm just saying that he makes.
It doesn't make it inherently wrong. It
doesn't make it wrong. It just says that they're taking certain practices that are making them a little bit more ritualistic, which is easier for pagans to accept.
And also, again, they don't know these dates.
You can completely disagree, but I can see it
with what you're saying.
I'm just
putting that out there. I completely.
It's too coincidental that they always overlap
with what you're saying.
A holiday.
Hey, I'm just making a point that
now what you're bringing up is something that I have pulled up right here that is an issue in the church. It's always been an issue in the church. It's called folk Catholicism. You know what that is?
No, enlighten us.
Folk Catholicism is essentially where Catholic practices that enter into churches localized to an area have infused cultural aspects to them. So, for example, here's the definition right here. Folk Catholicism can be broadly described as various ethnic expressions and practices of Catholicism intermingled with aspects of folk religion. So you're talking about like Irish fairies, those kinds of things. And like that belief system is generally a cultural thing that's been absorbed into a localized area. What
we're trying to say, which we've had this discussion before off this podcast, is that the practice, a lot of practices that are related to the Catholic teaching still, it's not taught this way per se by the church, but in practice, a ton of people have developed a culture of something that is a little bit more ritualistically tied to exactly what you're just saying, and that's a problem still.
Yeah,
and also if what you're describing is the folk Catholicism, yes, it is an issue. That is an issue. That's not an issue with the foundation of the faith.
No, okay.
I don't think we're saying that.
Practice. We're saying in practice. That's why we've brought up certain things that get turned into issues.
But also back to the holiday dates. I mean, that is a known thing that they didn't know the dates. So why wouldn't you be like, hey, that's the date? I mean,
we're not saying Easter is, but because I'm pretty sure Easter actually has a legit date. But
yeah. I think they've recalculated that one or something. Yeah, but the other ones like
specifically
also like the saint days.
Tied.
I mean, again, you don't know what day.
There is not. I don't know the exact background of Christmas in the Catholic Church, but I know that there are scholarly questions as to whether or not you would have shepherds in the field during the cold months of December.
No, he definitely therefore fall. We just don't know when.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who actually think it was probably.
I'm sorry, not died. I'm sorry. He definitely was born. Sorry, it's a completely different holiday.
there's a lot of people who say that he was most likely born in September. Yeah. This is a historical, theological, scholarly debate. I'm not getting in on that one.
Yeah. We're just saying Christmas just so happens to be a previous pagan holiday time.
Yeah, and again, it's not that they're absorbing necessarily like all the pagan practices. Yeah. It's just like when you are converting a people,
you're usurping their holidays.
Yeah, why wouldn't you do that? It's the same thing as the temples. Like, it makes so much sense not to just completely raise a pagan temple instead of be like, nope, that temple for Athena, nope, that's a church now. Like, why wouldn't you do it? It's a beautiful building.
Well, you could easily take remove the pagan aspects of it and keep the building.
Well, I mean, so like I've been to the Vatican and there's a ton of statues that they have there that they took from various parts of the world.
Yeah.
They're very pagan. But they etch the faces sometimes to make it look more like Abrahamic and things like that, and that kind of terminology. And they're very open about it. If you do the tour, they tell you it's like that statue used to be Zeus, but like we changed it a little bit. Now it's God. There you go.
Well, there is a reason why a lot of Greeks, when they did art depicting God, it kind of looks Zeusy.
Yeah. There's also his point in here about, the popes that were captured by the French.
Yeah,
having to move out of multiple. The Vatican.
There's also the whole. I forget. Does he talk about Tyndale at all in this? I can't remember.
I don't remember, but he definitely talks about when you had the multiple different popes.
Yeah, he doesn't really talk about Tyndale. Yeah. He does bring up. I think he brings up the Duke Bible actually.
He does bring that one up because they were being persecuted at the time. It definitely added to some of the aspects that were going on for Magellan.
Tyndale was just a footnote, though, if I remember correctly. Like, he was not a main character. Like Luther was. Obviously, they give a lot more time to Luther in this book.
He also really talks about how cathedrals, just like with how long they took to build, basically 3 to 4 centuries. He talks about how they're just very much a symbol for the mindset of the era, because we don't really know anything about the architects or the builders. Yeah, they're just nameless, and what we have is just this community built project,
that was a fascinating thing to bring up.
Tyndale was not a footnote, but
I guess there's more of them in there.
There's a lot of Tyndales, but the thing is like there's a lot of things that I'm just going to make this general comment. I'm not going to delve into specifically Tyndale, but there's a lot of things that were hidden behind the veil of like an action by the church in order to get a political thing to happen. And a lot of what goes on during the Reformation, I don't like calling it that, but that's fine. If you want to call it that, the historical Reformation.
I mean, it did lead to a lot of Reformation in the church. You can't deny that.
I'm just saying, like, I don't like that terminology, but that's fine. A lot of it was politics. A lot of it was politically driven. Yeah. There was monarchs that wanted things done that they were able to accomplish by removing the church. There was other people they didn't like that they were able to burn at the stake by changing the rules. You get the Calvinists who went extremely rigid to the point where people were having a hard time living.
I mean, let's be honest though, that is a direct opposite and equal reaction to the pure just orgy fueled Vatican at the time. So that hypocrisy there was just something that pushed them.
I'm not saying what drove them to it. I'm just saying
this is an era of extremes, Chris.
Yes. Very polar extremes. In every,
this is a world where you're guilty until proven innocent.
It's a world lit only by fire.
No, I mean, seriously though, this was one where you are guilty until proven innocent. This is what has led to exactly what.
And sometimes you are proven innocent. Sometimes you're proven innocent by, you're a witch. Let's tie a cinder block around you and throw you into a river and see if you survive.
Realize, though, it really did crush ideas and innovation in any of these places that were having extreme, that were victims of extreme thought. Instantly, the one party would come in and start accusing you of something. So it would crush anyone who had a differing idea. The whole witch concept, right? Like if you said something that was different, they found a way to say you're a heretic or a witch.
I think the book did a pretty good job. Again, this is just supposed to be a cursory glance at this.
Yeah.
But it does a good job of telling you some of the political machinations of what led. Again, he focuses a lot of time on Luther. He does a good job telling you
and
the Borgias too, giving you time to think about what is the Pope thinking at this time? What is he doing? What are these other cardinals doing? What is this prince doing? What is Luther thinking? What is, and again, it just shows you that there's so much going on. A lot of it's political. And it's just, again, it's the time.
And he doesn't paint anyone as good.
No, they also.
I just want to point out, he criticizes basically everybody. I mean, at this time, you have to realize what was going on with the Catholic Church, especially at the Vatican. It was very corrupt.
Extremely. I disagree.
You can't disagree.
I can if I want.
You can't. It's fact that every one of those popes at this time, your 5 bad popes, every single one of them was guilty of nepotism by just giving out cardinal hats and bishops.
That is a subjective view.
One was 10.
No, one of them was 10 years old, didn't do a single thing of training, and was made a bishop of a place that he was never going to go move to either. That's Pope Leo over there, just giving out things to Medici children. Then you have Borgia, who had how many bastard children? How many did he have, Chris?
I don't have a clue, but I have a counter. I have a counterpoint.
Did he not have a whore the entire time in the Vatican with him?
I don't have an answer to that question. I know that he's portrayed that way in many shows and programs.
Oh my gosh, you're going to say it's bullcrap.
No, I'm not. I have a different argument. He
admits to all of it.
Will you allow me to counter your points? The only thing I'm going to say on this point is no, I don't believe the church is corrupt. I believe in my mind, because I am a Catholic, that the popes at the time were put in place for a reason, and we will never know that reason till we die and we find out that way.
Okay.
I got a counterpoint to that. 2 of them. 1, I would agree that the institution, or I guess the church itself, is not corrupt, but the people definitely were. So I don't know how you'd separate the 2. But 2,
well, the Bible itself was not corrupted. We'll say that.
I guess, the religion.
The enforcement was corrupted.
Yeah, there you go.
The Bible was not corrupt. You see, there's 2 things here, Chris. There's the Bible and the religious texts not being corrupt. And then there's the people who are charged with enforcing
the actual practice of the people enforcing.
Who are supposed to live by it and teach it and enforce the standards. They were corrupt.
Yeah, and there's obviously not all of them were.
I am in disagreement because I believe, and this is my belief, that whatever person is put in charge of the church is put there for a reason, and I am not going to pretend like I know what that reason was.
So my comment is, did those popes live by biblical values?
Did anybody in the Bible live by biblical values other than Jesus himself?
My comment is
you're not answering that question.
Here's the thing. Is the Pope not expected to live by those values?
The expectation
and strive for it.
And strive for them. Right.
The expectation that we live by those values is not solely to the Pope, it's to everybody.
Yes,
but I have a question.
But I would like you to name for me a single person besides the one that we all know.
Do we lament David's actions or do we celebrate them, Chris?
Oh, we lament them.
So, okay, can you at least lament the actions of these people?
There are definitely individual actions I would frown upon.
Okay, Chris, my question is this. Was Savonarola
I am not prepared. No, I'm not prepared to comment on that one. I have no idea.
Really, because he was also a devout Catholic who commented.
I know he lacked obedience.
Obedience to sin is not a task in charge of the Bible.
This is a conversation for a different time.
Okay, I'm just saying Savonarola.
This is a conversation for a different time.
Wait, I'm just saying he called out orgies. He called out all sorts of this terrible behavior, very unchristian behavior, because he should tell his flock that behavior is not good. It's not acceptable. It is not Christian. Okay. That is something he should do, or he would be leading his flock astray. Wait.
Okay. You know what? You keep going on and on, and I disagree with you. I'm just going to flat out say I disagree with you.
He was killed for it, though.
That was the punishment for that time frame. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the punishment that you get for that.
That shouldn't have been the punishment. That should never be the punishment within the church, because he was the one upholding Christian values. Yes, he was the one.
Was he now?
Yes, he was.
Yes. Interesting.
He was.
He was. I don't know what you're.
Yeah, I don't know what.
I believe
that they have
real. I believe there's a real.
The church has recanted on that action, haven't they?
I don't know that they have or haven't, but I want to point out.
I think they have recanted.
I want to point something out for you.
Okay.
there is a specific way in which the Christians are expected to handle calling out their brother's sin. Is it by publicly decreeing that what one person is doing is sinful and that person should be called out? Or do we call out the sins, like St. Paul says, and quietly tell our brothers and sisters what they're doing wrong?
I mean,
how do you rectify that with burning people for heresy, Chris? I know you're going to support that here in a second.
I never said I supported burning for heresy.
I mean, he was burned for heresy.
But then,
yeah,
I'm just saying, like, technically speaking, the penalty for that era was death. For pretty much anything you do wrong. Penalty for error, because they didn't have prisons to put people in, so they just killed them.
If somebody is,
I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. That's what they did.
If the issue of the day is if he's preaching from the pulpit about sins that you should not be committing, and he's talking about orgies and things that are being done in certain locations and how they should not be used as examples, even though, because like you gotta realize he is having to dispel the image that this is acceptable.
Yeah,
because
people are asking about it.
Yeah, because someone significantly higher up than him in the church
there are
is saying
ways
it is good.
There are ways to handle it without directly causing shame to the institution.
What's crazy to me is that you're defending him getting burned instead of defending him calling this out.
Mm-hmm.
I have never said that he was wrong about what he said, but
yeah, you're defending.
There are ways to handle it.
I don't understand. I guess I don't understand how one can handle it the way you claim.
Are expectations for how you handle things.
It's like you're saying he didn't leave a voicemail, but he posted on social media. Like, he shouldn't get burned for this. Sure, maybe
I did not say that he should get burned for it. I'm telling you that was the penalty. That was the penalty at the time when he did this. That doesn't mean I agree with it.
Let's move on. I don't think Chris is going to move on this one. And neither will Andrew, so let's go on.
Do I think that the punishment fit the crime? No, I do not. But that was the punishment for the era.
I don't think there was a crime.
That is fine for you to say that.
I mean, what
that is your opinion. If I find out the church has already recanted on this, I will let you know.
I think they did, but yeah.
I don't know for sure. I'm just letting you know that I know that's the punishment.
What about the part when he is talking about the reference to how much beer these people drank? Especially in Britain, where it's like they get a capital allowance, like their allowance is like 1 gallon of beer a day.
Yeah, and you start at 8 or something.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's the English for you, though. Yeah. That explains so much. That's why life expectancy was total shit.
Yep. But the water was nasty, so that was the cleanest thing you could drink.
That's true. Everyone hated the English. I mean, they still do, but that's.
Yeah, I don't think he actually did get. I don't think the church ever recanted on this one.
That's pretty messed up. But all right, there's also the fact that pilgrimages as like a punishment. I don't know. I still
a lot of
myself.
The only people who have said that was wrong was essentially the Protestants, because they call him a proto-Protestant. Anyways, back to this. Go ahead.
Which is crazy to me because he wasn't I guess he was protesting in a way.
I mean, he was told to recant.
Well, the Catholic Church did come out and say, if you read up in the Wikipedia, the Catholic Church did come out and say, like, no, he's not a proto-Protestant. He pretty much aligned with Rome, other than him doing things inappropriately and how he handled calling out clergy. So that's the main thing they said about that.
There was, I mean, I'll say this with certain things, I feel like he does not do an adequate job in this book of describing the context of certain actions. Just the sign of the times, like he'll just say something happened and not put in deeper context. I know there's the persecution of Jews in Spain, that type of thing. He just kind of brings it up without delving into it a little bit more.
He doesn't really talk about why people were doing
he doesn't talk about why, which I think...
I guess they apologized for Galileo. Maybe that's who I'm thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, they did apologize for Galileo.
Apologize for
but I don't think they killed Galileo, did they? they just exiled him, didn't they?
Yeah, he died in his house.
Yeah,
under house arrest.
Yeah, because he wasn't actually killed by them, but like I guess the aftermath of what
he was too
did
popular
to him.
to be fair. He was protected by a patron in the city.
Right.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. They Galileo, because he was actually correct about what he was bringing.
I mean,
up. It was not heresy what he did.
What about?
I mean, it might have been at the time. I don't know, but
the big thing that really popped everything off, though, is when you look at Germany, that's where everything really happens, right? Because they send the people to sell indulgences to Germany.
And a lot of that was handled by the local bishops. It wasn't necessarily.
You still got accountability.
Yeah.
The buck stops with the Pope still, Chris. That's all I'm saying.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but based on reading up on the era further, it sounds like there was an awareness.
I mean, he makes that point in the book that Tetzel kind of went on his own, but he was still being sponsored by one of the bishops in the area, who, again, they were informing Pope Leo, and Pope Leo didn't really care. He's
Leo kind of ignored a lot.
Oh yeah, he ignored it completely
because he was too busy spending all the money.
I'm not arguing that the popes are fiscally responsible. I'm not arguing that.
No, but the thing, like, he didn't hold a lot of accountability over the actions of the curia or the cardinals that were out there doing things. Like, it's very apparent in this book when he talks about certain actions where they just kind of do things.
Well, there's also some, miscommunications that he highlights in this book, where essentially, like, the cardinal's going out and he assumes that what he's doing is giving penalties to Luther that he never carries out, essentially. And then
that first thing never gets there. Yeah,
right, and never gets there. And so the cardinal doesn't do what he's supposed to do, and then Leo thinks it's handled. So it's like that clearly didn't work out in the favor of the church.
But it is really important to remember, though, that the church literally owned half the wealth in Germany. Half.
I'm not arguing about who owned what. I'm just saying, like, the miscommunication clearly caused more damage than it could have.
Well, Luther had legitimate complaints.
Can we get into the most important part of this book? The whole reason he wrote it in the first place?
I mean, it's kind of the most boring part.
I liked this part a lot, actually. This is my favorite part of the whole book.
He gets around the world, sort of.
Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
And then he
becomes a little prophet in the Philippines.
Yeah, he decides to get way too religious in the Philippines and dies because
But he allegedly cured somebody with prayer, which is super cool, actually.
Yeah, but
that is pretty neat.
But it also messed with his head to the point that he went and was stupid.
Yep.
But jokes on him, or jokes on the people who wrote about him, because 95% of the Philippines is Catholic now.
Oh man,
at least according to the book,
they are nuts now, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
They are great people, but that the Catholicism part is a little nuts.
I think that's the country where they actually do, like,
how many cardinals do you have from
public
the
crucifixions and stuff, don't they?
They do, yes, and they volunteer for that, and also they straight up just murder people for drug stuff and things like that.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, how many cardinals do you have from the Philippines? I feel like they're underrepresented.
I have no idea the answer to that question. That's not really something that I would be paying attention to.
No, they're a little too intense even for Rome.
But this is interesting because, like, Magellan, like, he's like, if I go home now at different parts of the story, he's like, I'm going to go home with nothing. And didn't he go essentially without the blessing of his kingdom? Like, he allied with them.
That part.
Didn't he like ally with the Portuguese instead of the Spanish?
No, he was Portuguese. He went with the Spanish.
Oh, he went with, that's right. I knew there was mixed loyalties here. Right.
So,
and then
that caused conflict throughout because he had Spanish admirals on his fleet, and they wanted to usurp him a couple times.
More than once. They lost ships along the way.
I said a couple times, Chris.
This whole voyage was way more dangerous than it seems like anybody expected.
Of course it was. I mean, that seaway is very dangerous too down there by Argentina. So, plus, there's no way they could have ever known how much food they actually needed to bring.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because they don't know the distances, and also, like, people are still telling you that it's flat. So you're just sailing to the edge of the world.
Yeah,
imagine. Sorry, go on.
Imagine if you actually okay, so for the flat earthers out there, imagine the world was actually flat and you got to the edge. What would you do? Like,
oh, okay. Well, the new flat
ride it off the edge, man.
No. So at the time, yes, that's exactly what would happen. But for the new flat Earth stuff, it's ringed by mountains, so you wouldn't actually go off the edge. You would just hit the mountains.
That's what the flat earthers believe.
Land on a mountain range.
Huh. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that.
So, I mean, Magellan gets stupid. I don't know how else to describe it.
I didn't think he was stupid. I thought he got what's the
hubristic?
Hubristic, yeah. But in the end, he kind of wins.
Hubristic is stupid. Okay, yeah, that's when you stop viewing yourself as man.
I mean, I think as man anymore. I think he technically won though, because the lasting thing is we got Magellan straight, and he basically converted the whole. I mean, he died, but
he didn't win shit. His entire family went extinct.
Yeah.
Nobody will ever forget him because of Magellan Strait, though.
I mean, unless he left some babies in the Philippines like all his sailors did.
I doubt it, based on his holier than thou attitude at the time.
Fine, maybe there's some Mother Marys there that are Magellan babies. Okay, I don't know.
But long story short, this guy sails all the way across the world to the Philippines from Portugal.
And Portugal, same thing.
Yeah. And he dies in the Philippines, but they end up completing the journey back to Spain.
Yeah.
And then they try to discredit him, but then the journals later on tell the story, and eventually
they try to give credit to the Spanish guy, basically.
Wasn't it his relative?
No, it was.
His relative died
against him.
Didn't he kill his relative?
No, his relative got killed because the Filipinos were sick and tired of the Spanish banging all the chicks there. So.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. They invited them to dinner and killed them.
Yes, brutally killed a bunch of them. So, I mean, the journey took a long time, but the story in telling it is very fast. Okay,
it was a pretty fast story. Yeah,
it's not a difficult story.
I mean, he gives a lot of background on Magellan, and I kind of wish that there was interspersed in what's going on in Magellan's. Maybe he could have told the story more fluidly.
Yeah, again, I forgot we were talking about Magellan. So it'd been cool to be like, I'm focusing on this one part of history because it's like, just keep this one in mind because it's going to lead into Magellan. I don't know how exactly he could have woven the narrative that way, but it would have been nice. Because to Chris's point, he does focus on some things a little bit more than others. Yeah. And it is confusing if you don't see the path that he's going.
Yeah, if you really if you understand the author's note before you read this, then I think it's fine. But because he really likes to give the perspective of the age. So, for example, another thing that he talked about, it's basically that the fact that artists of that day cared way more about creating beauty and more than any moral quandaries about where the money came from or whatever else there was. It was just all about the mission. You know what I'm saying? It's very objectives based. That's what Magellan was too. He didn't care how he got there. He just cared that he got there, right? So he's trying to create that image when you look through what the authors did, what the playwrights did, what the artists did, what the inventors did. So Da Vinci over there, probably the most brilliant person to ever exist. He didn't care where his money came from. He just created shit, right? Yep. So same thing with the cathedrals. You don't even hear who the architects are. As we mentioned earlier, all you see is this master plan that was built over centuries. So it's an era of objectives, not, we're going to do this and this because we're going to beat you over the head with it. That's kind of the backlash that happens after with Protestant groups, some of them where they take it to the other extreme of we're anti-education almost in certain things, like the Calvinists were at least.
Yep. So here's some interesting Goodreads reviews that I had highlighted. This person says inconsistencies and half-truths make for an interesting narrative, but not good history. They point out that the Pied Piper was depicted as an actual historical character and murder of 130 children, which of course is not a real person.
I thought it was a real person. I thought I read the outside of this book though.
And then they also talk about how, actually, this is funny that this person covers it. They talk about how, and I looked this up too, Savonarola was not loved by the people.
I mean,
period.
The BBC says the story is likely based on actual historical incident.
It's possible, but it doesn't seem like the Pied Piper was a real person. Might have been
He
multiple
depicts him as probably most likely a serial killer of children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyways,
that's what he does. No, like, okay, there's a lot of propaganda, Chris, about Savonarola. All right, if you're,
I just thought I wasn't. That wasn't the reason why I picked that interview out.
No. But I'm just making the point though that like if you're gonna say, and I'm willing to say that the Italian populace was very propaganda based against Borgia. Okay, the same thing happened from the papacy towards Savonarola. They had to justify his killing. Just saying.
I mean, that's when you look at a lot of killings were twisted in a way to make them, agreeable with whoever needs to be agreeable to kill the person. Like, for example, one of the biggest reasons why Tyndale was persecuted in the first place is because he was opposed to Henry VIII's divorce. He was one of the biggest proponents against it. Sir Thomas More was totally on board with Tyndale's agreement that he shouldn't get the divorce, period. So Henry VIII looked for any reason to get him killed, and his Bible translation seemed like a good idea.
I mean, that right there, though. Okay, let's look at that for Henry, King Henry, good old boy, right?
I'm just saying, like that. A lot of people immediately just associate Tyndale was killed because of his Bible. That's not really what happened.
They're killed because of politics, and
yes,
a big thing about this era is that the church was heavily involved in politics more than faith.
Mm-hmm.
It just was like his marriage alliances. Okay, yes, there's an aspect there's an important aspect of marriage within the faith, but the whole motive for them to not grant that divorce to begin with was politics. The whole reason they allowed the marriage to begin with was politics.
Well, wasn't the Pope captured by the Holy Emperor at the time, or was with that?
I mean, okay, this entire era is popes basically captured by somebody and under the influence to make decisions in one direction or the other. It's not exactly an unbiased time frame. You have to admit that there's a crap ton of corruption involved with that.
Yeah, but the Pope being captured and that would affect anybody's decision making.
Yes, but that still means that the church was corrupt at the time. That's my point.
That does not. No, you're taking something that I agree with, and you're taking it to prove something I don't agree with.
No, it's not. Okay, the people involved in making decisions with the power of the church were corrupt at that time.
Disagree.
It's no different than when you have the popes that were basically held captive by the French king in the non-Vatican location. Their decisions were not purely faith-based objective decisions. They were, what does the French king want us to do so? Because we are currently guarded by French soldiers. That's a legitimate thing, and I think it's a fair criticism.
You could say the word criticism. I would not call that automatic corruption.
What is corruption to you, Chris?
Well, corruption.
I need to know what you mean. What does corruption?
Let's get the definition of corruption, because corruption to me means something entirely different than the way you're using.
I'm just gonna say it. If it's a pope, it can't be.
Yeah,
no, that's not what I'm saying.
Is it not corrupt if you succumb to blackmail? I need to know this.
That's a very subjective conversation that I'm not getting into right now.
No. Like
even outside of the Pope, just anyone.
Let me read the definition and see where I land on this one. It says corruption is a form of dishonesty or criminal offense which is undertaken by a person or an organization which is entrusted to a position of authority in order to acquire illicit benefits or abuse power for one's personal gain. I disagree. This doesn't sound like that at all.
What?
I think we should end this conversation with the book.
I would not describe what you described as flat out institutional corruption.
Does blackmail count? Does doing actions at the behest of blackmail against the interests of your subjects not count as corruption? because you are
that
currently
sounds like
that's
a
personal
captured interest. That doesn't sound like a
no. That's a form of corruption. You are doing it for personal protection. That is putting your interests above others, above your station, even. That's
okay, but you have to prove that that's exactly what it was, and I don't.
They don't
Look. I'm just gonna flat out say it. This book is biased against Catholicism, flat out. Okay, I don't appreciate that at all.
As a person from a faith that is Protestant, technically, I read everything he writes about Martin Luther, and I find him despicable
I did
in
not
many
think
ways.
he was that. I didn't think he was that bad on Luther, honestly.
He spent an entire several pages about Luther talking
basically
about
making him
I know, but that was
lunatic.
that was the humor of according to him, that was the humor of the Germans at the times. Like, why on earth are you holding that against Luther if he just had the same humor as the people he was surrounded by?
No, he literally depicts him as a raving lunatic half the time.
Yes.
I mean, he did get struck by a lightning, or did I misread that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Wow, I don't know what you're talking about either.
Or no, I'm thinking of the storm he was caught in, and he prayed to God to survive it or whatever. Anyways.
All I'm saying is, okay, Chris, at the same time, the era of
I feel like this guy wrote a book about an
orgies.
era he just hates. I feel like he said, you know what? I hate the medieval ages. I'm just going to write this book about something I hate.
Oh, I forgot. Can we just talk, though, about how this guy, it's hilarious because it's so obvious that that one good Dutch pope that was chosen after these corruptions, that he was totally killed. He was totally.
Oh, I don't know about that. He was kind of old when he became the pope.
They picked him. He didn't even last a year.
Yeah, but I thought he would because they've done this before. Where like you'll pick a pope that is old, so that it's like not as long of a papacy necessarily. Like that. I mean, that's happened a lot where you pick somebody who's a good pope.
What are your thoughts on the Dutch pope that accidentally got chosen? Accidentally, according to the Italians, because they don't want to have non-Italians as popes. And he comes in and basically validates every single accusation of the Protestants.
I don't know that. Look, I don't know enough about that, and this book doesn't go into it enough for me to make a comment on that.
But then he dies within the year. I'm just saying, and then they don't elect a
There's a lot of
non-Italian
smoke,
pope
I guess,
until John Paul.
Yeah,
to me, there's a lot of this. This book does a terrible job with history. It's a good story. It's a terrible job with history. And like I said before, a lot of half-truths lead to a good story.
Okay, well,
you never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Chris, look up this Dutch pope for me someday and tell me what you think of him.
Yeah. Also, okay, I just have to say, I think the author was very honest in what his biases were in the author's note. He didn't try to mislead the reader, but you are very biased when you're reading this. So you, the fact that this is just the time, and also again, he's painting what people thought of the time. So, I mean, I think he did a good job. It wasn't meant to be an exhaustive look at every single possible corruption or every single monarch or pope or Luther. It's just supposed to be these things happen. These are some important parts of these things, and then gives you a brief overview of the time. This is hundreds of years that he has to cover in only a couple hundred pages.
Hey, Andrew, the Pope you're talking about was 64 when he died. He wasn't a young man.
Still, he died within a year.
I'm just letting you know he was not a young man.
Hated by everybody who he came in and said they were all corrupt sinners.
Yeah.
I just want to say that's what he did. He basically pulled himself in.
I mean, at least he didn't put a dead corpse on trial like that other Pope I found out about did.
Wasn't that funny, Chris? And I said that to you.
I was very surprised to find out about that. Although I'm not surprised. I mean, technically speaking, by the logic of the actual,
No, that was petty. That was ridiculous.
No. That's not what I was getting. That's not at all what I was getting at. I'm not saying that a Pope can't make a petty decision. That definitely can happen. But no, what I was going to get at was technically speaking, per the actual rules of the Catholic Church, the only person who can actually criticize a previous pope to the extent of heresy anyways is the next pope following him or the following popes after that. Essentially the only see that can judge the previous holy see is a new holy see. That's how the logic of the church works.
I just want
so technically if Adrian said all those things, he was totally allowed to say those things.
So they were true.
No, he's allowed
true.
to say them.
They would have been true. You can't criticize that Pope, Chris. You can't criticize your Pope.
I'm not criticizing him. I'm saying that whatever he said, he was allowed to say.
I honor your Pope and say he was truthful. All right. No. So to add on to what Will said, like, I think this guy is very honest about his perspective, what he's trying to accomplish with this book. But more than that, I think he criticizes everybody fairly. I think the key to realize about this is that everyone's flawed, but this was a particularly flawed and brutal time period.
Yeah.
And you have an era of extremes, and it's a pendulum swinging. So if people start to develop hatred for one group in power, be it the Catholic Church or whatever it is, there's some massive extreme swings. So you go from the drunken orgies and just spending tons of money to Calvinists over there saying you can't drink any alcohol and we're going to kill you if you do something that we think is debaucherous. So era of extremes. I understand why people fled to the Americas. I understand it completely.
And you can also understand why Europe became so fractious at this time and started to fracture a lot is because of these extremes. Like, I mean, we're kind of seeing that now. People are becoming very polarized.
And it's more reaction. It's reactionary too. It's not even naturally what they're going for. Like, oh, I'm just going to go here. No, it's because I'm against you. I'm going to go here, kind of thing. I'll give you this one, Chris, because it's not the book he's writing and not the era he's really focusing on per se. But he does not give the church credit for their preservation of knowledge in
I meant to say that at the beginning. Yes, I totally agree.
And he does give them credit for sponsoring the humanists and all the universities and them existing.
Yeah, he also compliments the Borgia popes a couple times.
He also compliments Pope Leo on how he treated artists, even Erasmus.
Yeah, because wasn't Leo the sponsor of like Michelangelo and all them?
Yes, but also he actually enjoyed some of the plays that poked fun at the papacy and the debauchery. It wasn't until they started being actually criticized by people for those behaviors that they started to react poorly to it. So, I mean, the Catholic Church is the reason for the universities that even brought us the Reformation. So, and the Renaissance, I should say.
Yeah. Oh, I think we've all touched on this a little bit, that at the time, the church, I think the church is a product of its time. It became way too embedded in the local BS politics of all these countries that it was essentially ruling. And because of that, it had to a lot of times pick the political side versus something else. And that caused, some legitimate complaints, some non-legitimate complaints.
And it shifted
lots of fractures.
Frequently.
Yes.
It shifted way too frequently. So when you're not taking a low time preference, long-term planning, they came really into the era of just like constant shifting alliances, making it where there was no stability, and they were constantly pissing somebody off. That is the bigger problem, right? If you can just be consistent, that can help with your preservation long-term way better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but it all came down to the money. They needed money.
It's a which and and what church still exists today?
All of them.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church still exists, for the record. I just want to point that out. But they did do a lot of good things.
Colors of Gaming. The answer to this question is no.
Yeah.
Andrew has made multiple.
So, Chris, just to go back to the Catholic thing, Judaism still exists too, Chris. So, what is your point here?
I don't think any church of anything is ever
length of existence doesn't equal perfection or you're above criticism. I
didn't
really
say that.
dislike that stance.
I didn't say that. That's not what I said. I have my own criticisms of various things that have happened or are happening.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. But I keep those to myself because, or, amongst close friends, I don't spread it wildly online like wildfire.
I just want to point out that Luther had no other choice. Not really.
So the only sympathy he gets from me is that he was used by political proponents who wanted him to do it.
Okay, but that's the
only sympathy he gets from me. That's it.
At the same time, the Catholic Church made it where that was the case.
He had plenty of opportunities to reconcile, and he eventually flip-flopped one too many times and lost that opportunity.
I don't think he ever flip-flopped. I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, I don't. He's inconsistent.
So you're going to tell me that he was mean to Luther and you don't remember the flip-flopping discussion in this book? There was a point in this book where he basically says that Luther was on the verge of reconciling and everybody was on board. And then at the last minute, he changed his mind.
Yeah, because he gives that. Are you talking about the Augsburg Confessions?
I don't remember. But I remember he said that there was a chance where he could have reconciled and he chose not to.
Yeah, because he had to admit that he didn't have a point, and he, at the end of the day, decided that he did, and he said he
was also threatened with death if he didn't.
Yes.
In both cases, he was threatened with death, so he decided to stick with his principles. Okay, that's
right or wrong. I mean, I can still respect the guy for standing up to. I mean, it's honestly kind of insane to think about. We don't really have an equivalent today, like standing before the president. I mean, we live in a free society. We can do that all the time. Mm-hmm. But at that point, just say anything, like even something simple, like calling out a local issue, because that's what he was doing. He actually thought the Pope didn't know, and he was calling out a local issue. You saw what happened. You read what happened.
I mean, for the sake of, as far as Luther goes, as far as Savonarola goes, those two guys are technically martyrs, which is something that which the Catholic Church technically champions the concept of martyrdom. So
they do, but they don't champion Luther or Savonarola as martyrs.
I know Luther was able to die of old age. So,
but I don't remember Luther actually dying a martyr.
That's what I'm saying. He died of old age. I just said that.
Yeah, he didn't die a martyr.
But technically, if he had been killed, he would have been a martyr.
The only
depends on who decides that.
See, no martyr has ever been in the main institution of power, Chris. Ever. You don't.
That's what you think.
You're not martyred when you are the system of power.
So you're saying that, let's say you're part of the system of power, Rome, and you go somewhere and outside your jurisdiction, you get killed.
You're not the system of power where you got martyred, Chris.
Okay,
you literally don't get martyred where you are the people
I would
in charge.
Not, even if it had happened to him, I would not consider him a martyr. Or Savonarola.
Yeah,
I would not.
The only reason why he wasn't killed is because Leo was courting the prince for the next Holy Roman Emperor. So that's the only reason why he wasn't killed.
Maybe things would be different if Leo had gotten his way. Who knows?
Probably not, because again, it wasn't Luther himself. He just happened to be at the right time. Well, the wrong place, wrong time.
Well, I've said this more than once. Do I think that if Luther had existed 100 years prior or 100 years after the time frame he actually existed in, do I think his thoughts and whatnot would have been in such a big deal to the point where he was persecuted the way he was? I think he probably would have gotten away with his opinions a little more 100 years prior, 100 years after. I think a lot of what happened to him was political, not necessarily within the church, but outside the church.
Okay, but isn't that kind of messed up?
I think he was used by political proponents against the church.
I have to ask you quick, Chris. Okay, say that he's being used.
I think he had some flaws. I think he definitely has some flaws.
Well, he's human.
In his thought process and his theology, has some flaws.
He's human. Yes. He's human. So I guess who persecuted him, though?
Well, eventually, because of the political forces using him, he was eventually had to be stifled by the church.
Yeah, so I guess, you're saying the church then is susceptible to political machinations outside of faith.
I think that he was elevated past a level of importance. I think he was elevated past a level of importance by political proponents against the church. And therefore, he had to be stomped down for his bad theology.
Wait. If the
I didn't say they needed to kill him necessarily.
No. Wait though. If you're saying that his ideas theoretically would have been potentially acceptable.
No, that's not what I said.
No, for debate and discussion, and not being like, oh, you have to completely recant or we'll deem you a heretic and kill and excommunicate you and kill you. If you're saying that, then theoretically the power was completely within the churches to accept Luther still, and his ability to have discourse.
No.
That's not what I'm saying at all. Wait, to the point
you're
that
misquoting
he would have told the people who were trying to use him politically to go F themselves, but instead he's threatened and he has to rely on those people trying to use him for protection. That's the environment that's created. Like, go ahead. I still don't understand why you can't just have Lutheranism be no different than Augustinian monks.
Yeah.
Because he had bad theology. He wanted to remove the frickin' letter of St. James from the Bible. That was one of the things he wanted to do.
I'm just saying that there are elements.
He had bad theology, and I don't think there should be an order of Luther.
Are you telling me that every single person has great theology
I'm saying that his theology was deeply flawed.
I mean, even
that's my personal opinion.
Even Augustine has some things that are now dismissed, Chris. So I don't even know what you're saying here.
Yeah,
I'm saying that
those bad, like the removing the letter. That's something like, hey, let's have a discussion. That's a terrible idea. Okay, move on.
And we're not even saying that's
I think he was elevated by proponents against the church, and motivated to continue on with his ideas past a point where he was able to be accepted back into the church because a whole movement formed behind him that was anti-church, aka Protestantism.
I would say
that's also tied to what we were saying, where over half of Germany's wealth was controlled by the church.
I understand what you're saying, Andrew.
I'm saying that greed on both ends, man. Greed on both ends. And in the Bible, there's nothing that would have supported having more than 10% for God. So that's some extreme greed when you think about it.
I cannot make a statement as I don't know enough about Germany's setup of their economy at the time. I really don't. I haven't studied it. I don't remember that actually being in this book either. I know that they talk about money being an issue.
He talks about how much wealth was estimated to have been controlled by the church.
And again, I do think that there are some anti-Catholic biases in this book, personally, which is why I don't like the book personally.
Okay, I'm just.
But saying, I did think his section on Magellan was good. I'll give him that. I thought Magellan was decent.
Going back to it real quick, I don't think that having an order of Luther for monks would have been acquiescing to say that every single thing he says is right and that's what the Catholic Church is going to follow. But he also has plenty of other ideas where it's like, how is some of his concepts, how are they that different than Jesuits in a sense when it comes to like the disdain for the extravagance and stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? Like I
think you're mixing up Jesuits with Franciscans
or Franciscan. Aren't Jesuits kind of communists? Don't we have a Jesuit Pope right now?
That's not at all what you were talking about. So I'm going to address what you were actually talking about, which is the Franciscans who actually do swear off pretty much all forms of wealth, period.
They do. And they also have the crypts and the freaky.
Yeah, it is pretty weird. But
I'm just saying
that is a legitimized true order of the church, whereas there are no internal orders for Luther because they never reconciled.
Okay, but
I understand.
Which is crazy because a lot of the stuff that he actually brings up with some sticking points that have really developed after him, honestly, was reconciled with Vatican II. So you really could have a Lutheran order. I don't think you would call it that because it would be all controversial and stuff.
Yeah.
But you could have people who follow that and be Catholic today.
Well, the other
especially
half
what
of
he
that,
was actually
but
saying,
also, Chris,
not what has been developed.
Yeah,
but let
Chris,
me finish that thought though, Will, because I know you're saying that. But the problem is you don't create a new order when orders overlap. So if what he said or what he was doing would already overlap with another order, there'd be no reason to create a new order or make a subset of an order that already exists. Because those exist.
All I'm saying is that it would have been possible if the church today was the church then. What Andrew is saying would have been possible.
And also, when you look at what he was saying early on, his early stuff before it became a fight,
his complaints about local clergy skimming off the top probably had some weight to him.
Okay,
but then he developed bad theology and had all kinds of issues with the church.
That was later, though.
I understand, and I know that he went a little crazy towards the end.
Chris, when we're talking about his bad theology, that was after. His worst stuff was after and reactionary to his poor treatment by the church itself. That's the key.
I mean, you can't argue that he dedicates most of his early letters, and the way he writes them is he does not think the Pope is at fault.
Yeah, I know that. I know that he did not initially say that.
I know, but then he gets punished.
Yeah, so then he's going to it's all the way to the top.
We're not saying he's we're not saying he's a perfect person here, but like
he definitely isn't.
Because he's 100% not. But he's very vindictive, I would say that, because once they, go after him, he starts to go reactionary and say that they all suck in return.
Yeah, but they get I don't want to spend this whole podcast on what Luther. He had plenty of chances to reconcile. He chose not to for whatever reasons he felt were necessary. That it just means that I don't personally follow his theology. I just know that some of his theology that I've read on, I don't agree with. I know the church doesn't agree with it. And I think that a lot of what happened to him was politically involved with the monarchs and the powers that be at the time. I think if he had had the opportunity to sit down and make discussion and do his actual reconciliation with the church, I think that the church would not view him the way they do today. He did not. None of that happened, though.
Well, he wasn't really invited to do that.
He was multiple times. He had plenty of options to try to.
Not honestly.
Well, I mean, that's your opinion. I disagree.
Well, it's not a discussion when you're just called to recant or die.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you have to think about the time frame.
Yes. Also look at how, when did each of these things occur? Did they occur earlier, later? At what point in time?
I just have to point out that the treatment of Savonarola is very chilling to trusting anything.
Yeah, and also Luther defends that he I believe that's the guy he ends up defending, and what ends up really making him step in it is that he defends what Savonarola says. And then
I think he defends.
No, he knows Huss or Haas or something. It was
he defends someone who the church had already killed as a heretic, and he said, and because of that, the person who he was debating led him down the path of saying that a council could err, and that's really what screwed him in the end. Because at that point, I guess to Chris's point, is that he was fully reconcilable. The church didn't really care about him at the time. But the moment he said that, that's when things really hit the fan for him.
And can we just point out that the whole purpose of those debates, when it comes to the cardinals and stuff, is to get you to say something they can kill you for?
Yes. That was the express purpose.
Yeah, man. It's kind of the...
For him, at least. That was express purpose for him.
Yeah, they literally try that, so they win by threatening to kill you, and then they have that power over you. It's no longer a debate. You have one choice: recant, or they now have an excuse to kill you. That's the ultimate checkmate in a debate of the era.
I don't know exactly what in this book that describes Luther is accurate and what's inaccurate, because there's so many inaccuracies in this book that are small details, half-truths, etc. So if we wanted to discuss this more in depth, I think it would be better if we actually did some kind of background research on this, more so than
oh my gosh, Chris, can I get you to read Luther's Catechism?
I watched that stupid Luther movie from 2003.
I don't know what that is, but you want me to...
It was very inaccurate portraying him as a
dramatized movie from Hollywood on religion, Chris? And it was inaccurate? Holy crap.
It was awful.
You should read the Catechism. This would be amazing. I would love for you to go through that.
I'd have to take so many notes just to make sure I'm keeping track of what I wish I would have kept better notes on this book personally. My notes are
I
not
always
very.
take notes when I read a book, Chris.
Now, I do know that. Well, let's just put it this way: if we were to cover something like that, that would be like way further on, because I would need lots of time to delve into that, and then it'd be like a straight up theological discussion, not a book discussion. But which is what this is turning into. So I want to get into us actually rating this book, and giving what we liked about it, what we disliked about it. I think it's very clear. I liked the Magellan story. I thought it was good. I thought that was actually the best part of this book. But there were some other parts that it's like, okay, I didn't know that about this time period, or like I had to actually do more research. This book prompted me to do more research. So the Magellan part elevates it from a 1 for me, because I had some biases going into this book, to I would even go as high as a 2.5, but I know you guys are going to give it much higher reviews than me, so I'm going to stick to my 2. But the only redeeming quality for me, because it's the only part that's an actual linear story, is the Magellan story. So part 3, I would skip the rest of this book and just read part 3, and I would have been much happier. And if Tom Hanks wasn't part of it, Tom Hanks was awesome.
I think that ruined the book for you.
Tom Hanks was that forward by Tom Hanks ruins this book. Don't read Tom Hanks's forward. Just read the author note and then read the book, or don't read it at all, because that's what I should have done.
Right. Oh my gosh. Okay. So for my rating, I'll do what I enjoyed the pacing. I enjoyed the cursory glance at a lot of the major players in this time. I enjoyed some of the little bit humorless, again, some of the stuff they talked about the popes and how they reacted to some of the things. And then also it was hilarious to me for him poking fun at Luther for the poop stuff. And then Magellan was also interesting. And Magellan's just a cool guy. And also that voyage in general is just really interesting, given the fact that he didn't know if he was going to fall off the edge of the earth. Something that I didn't like is, I said before, is that he made it bleaker than it probably should have been. There was a lot of things that the Catholic Church and Christendom in general preserved during this time. And it would have been better if he had spent more time on that instead of just a little bit here and there. And then, some of the actual scholars of the time who has pushed back on this book are openly dismiss it, really focus on the crux of the book is the medieval mind. How do people view this time? And he makes it very bleak. They really, they lived, they died. That's basically it. Very sad. But I guess there is some more contemporary historical stuff that shows that they were more hopeful. They weren't nearly as bleak. It just was a shorter lifespan, and it was a little bit more brutal than it is now, essentially. I still think it's really good. I know Chris hated it. Definitely, I do think that the guy is openly has an open anti-Christian bias. He doesn't.
He absolutely does.
He doesn't hide it. He puts it in the author note. He also has it in the very beginning, and I pointed that out. So if you're going into that knowing that he is not going to sugarcoat Christianity for you, then yeah, I think you can get a lot out of this book. It shouldn't be the end-all be-all for this era. Again, it just touches on things. He very much takes a stance in some things that are murky. And yeah, so anyway, I still think it was good. So I would give it a 4. I still enjoyed it for what it was. It was well written. I didn't find a bunch of errors as far as grammatical errors. It kept me interested. There's a couple things I disagree with, a couple things I thought were wrong, especially after I looked it up. But overall, it was good.
Overall, I think I agree with you, Will. I would say, as already mentioned previously, I think he needs to read the Bible before he starts talking about the different things that are key principles and traits of the Bible that are appreciated, because justice is very freaking important in the Bible, and he's trying to claim that that's a pagan thing.
That whole intro section, I might actually take it down to 3.5 because that was
yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
It's really bad. I know it. In fairness, those were also very much Roman. So, like, if he had just said that they weren't solely Christian principles, because
I mean other cultures have come to those things. Yeah,
like Paul being a Roman citizen in the Bible, it's like, a lot of these things that are Christian principles are being applied because of Roman law to Paul. So,
well, I mean, as an aside, we've discussed like why Christianity was able to flourish in Roman culture.
Yeah,
that's a whole other discussion.
Aside, yeah, as we've discussed it aside, a lot of principles in Christianity align with what Romans aspire to too. So it's not, if he had simply said that these were not solely Christian virtues,
yeah,
I would have been a little bit more in alignment with it, because Stoicism does have those same virtues.
But also, I don't, like, even bring that up, I don't understand the point of what he was trying to do, other than
it shows his biases.
Yes, exactly.
He's trying to point out that like the Christianity owes roots to paganism, which makes no sense.
Yeah, and I think it's valuable to see the politics of the era, because I do think that this was a very power corrupted era of human history, be it the church of all denominations. But like, it's one of those things where most people don't really look at it. And I think it's important to get that timeline to see that people are people.
Yeah. It also gets us to now. Like, why is the U.S. the U.S.?
Yeah, I think this is a very good perspective on why we have values that we have. What created our founding documents, even, because the guilt, you're innocent, you're not innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty until proven innocent in this world, and it's usually death. And they're not wanting any discourse and free speech at all. It's, if someone in power wants to get rid of you, you're gone. And it just shows also the fact that even in that era, nothing could stop the hunger for knowledge, right? Nothing could stop that desire to accomplish things. It's very valuable. I do have a problem with the fact that he does not give enough credit for the church preserving a lot of things, or even the fact that he does give credit that the universities were developed and established by the church, but I don't think he necessarily does it as enough of a kudos kind of thing. But
it's more of like an afterthought.
It's more of an afterthought.
Yeah, it's like he's begrudgingly admitting it.
Yeah, he's like begrudgingly admitting it, in a sense that like the church created their own downfall, their own challenger, I guess is how he kind of frames it. And like it developed a mind of its own and doesn't owe itself to it. But overall, I think it's a good book. I think the Magellan part is just interesting in general, to learn more about what was Magellan's downfall, because everyone knows he dies, but not many people, I think, really realize why he dies.
Yep.
The fact that he kind of snatches defeat from the jaws of victory in a sense. But I think that needs this whole part 1, part 2, just to describe how he gets there. Because he takes a very extreme position, right? When he's trying to convert the locals. And you need to understand why he would do such a thing when he's a product of such an extreme time.
Yeah. Also, because if you're going into it with your modern sensibilities, you would probably be like, why would he even spend the time to do this?
Exactly. And I think without having read parts 1 and 2, I don't think you can really understand how he can have achieved everything he dreamed to achieve and then go kind of crazy. So I want to give it a 3.5 as well.
Yeah.
It's his biases are annoying, but I can't fault him too much, just because he is upfront about it, right? And it's not the story he's trying to tell. He's trying to tell the mindset of extremism, I think, in the era.
So I think our average rating is a 3 based on that.
Yeah. I can't give a 4, just because he does pick a narrative for the sake of having a narrative, instead of providing the extra context, and that some things are disputed. So he's fair to the Borgias, I think, but he does pick the narrative that he thinks is most he thinks he can most support given the evidence, which is also it's fair, but it kind of goes, it doesn't necessarily factor in the context of Italian propaganda against a Spanish pope, well, a Catalan pope. So, gotta have the correct.
Because yes, Spain is like multiple things at this time.
Yeah.
But anyways, I know that we've gone on much longer than we planned to at this point.
Yeah.
And if we do cover some more Middle Ages books, or if we do eventually cover the Catechism of Luther or something, if we do any of those things, I'm sure this theological discussion will get much more heated than it did today. But I can say for a fact that I will not probably ever pick this book up and read it again. This is probably the only time I'll give it a read. But
I mean, I'll be honest, Chris, any rereading books, unless it's a fun book, you don't just go back and reread it unless you're trying to learn something again about it. So
I'd rather reread The Last Battle again by C.S. Lewis.
I mean, that's not the worst book ever if you stop at page 200.
You just read the last 10 pages. There you go.
Because you hated that monkey so much.
I
did. Anyways, as always, I'm Chris.
And I'm Will.
And I'm Andrew.
And we'll see you all on the next Print It and Press.
We should say what book that is, Chris.
Oh, yeah. Is the next one Robert Galbraith, or is it a different one?
It's the Out of the Silent Planet, Chris.
No, is it? Oh, yeah, this is Will's book. Yeah, it's Out of the Silent Planet. You're right. It is a C.S. Lewis book. My goodness. And then after that, I think, is the Robert Galbraith book, right? J.K. Rowling, for those who don't know.
Yes, that is it.
And the Sound of the Planet, it's like a 130-page book, so I expect all of y'all paying attention to read it. It's short.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not reading along to these books yet, what are you guys doing?
Why are you watching this?
Join our book club and get literate. All right,
I'm gonna start posting. Yes. Oh, look at this. Colors of Gaming likes that one. He says Space Trilogy slaps. That's right. It's a good series. Anyways, I'm gonna start posting in the community tab on YouTube the books that are coming up so that people can see it, even if they're too lazy to join our Goodreads book club or our book club's book club.
Yeah.
At least you'll know what book's coming next. So, anyways, like I said, as always, this has been Printed and Pressed, and we'll see you on the CHRILLCAST next week, but Printed and Pressed in 2 weeks. Yep. Subscribe, like, follow, whatever you got to do on the platform you're on, and we'll see you on the next one.